All right, it's January 1st, 2025. This is Daniel Ari Friedman. I'm going to be reading and showing the plain text and the illuminated pages of America, a Prophecy, written by William Blake in 1793. As when a dream of Tiralitha flies the midnight hour, in vain the dreamer grasps the joyful images, they fly, seen in obscured traces in the vale of Lutha, so the British colonies beneath the woeful princes fade. And so the princes fade from earth, scarce seen by souls of men, but though obscured, this is the form of the angelic land. The shadowy daughter of Urthona stood before red Orc, when 14 sons had faintly journeyed o'er his dark abode. His food she brought in iron baskets, his drink in cups of iron. Crowned with a helmet and dark hair the nameless female stood, a quiver with its burning stores, a bow like that of night. When pestilences shot from heaven, no other arms she need. Invulnerable though naked, save where clouds roll round her loins, their awful folds in the dark air. Silent she stood as night, for never from her iron tongue could voice or sound arise, but dumb till that dread day when Orc assayed his fierce embrace. Dark virgin, said the hairy youth, thy father stern, abhorred, rivets my tenfold chains, while still on high my spirit soars. Sometimes an eagle screaming in the sky, sometimes a lion stalking upon the mountains, and sometimes a whale. I lash the raging fathomless abyss, anon a serpent folding, around the pillars of Urthona, and round thy dark limbs, on the Canadian wilds I fold. Feeble my spirit folds, for chained beneath I rent these caverns. When thou bringest food, I howl my joy, and my red eyes seek to behold thy face. In vain, these clouds roll to and fro, and hide thee from my sight. Silent as despairing love, and strong as jealousy, the hairy shoulders rend the links, free are the wrists of fire. Round the terrific loins he seized the panting, struggling womb. It joyed. She put aside her clouds and smiled her firstborn smile, as when a black cloud shows its lightnings to the silent deep. Soon as she saw the terrible boy, then burst the virgin cry. I know thee, I have found thee, and I will not let thee go. Thou art the image of God who dwells in darkness of Africa, and thou art fallen to give me life in regions of dark death. On my American plains I feel the struggling afflictions, endured by roots that writhe their arms into the nether deep. I see a serpent in Canada who courts me to his love, in Mexico an eagle, and a lion in Peru. I see a whale in the South Sea, drinking my soul away. Oh, what limb-rending pains I feel, thy fire and my frost mingle in howling pains, in furrows by thy lightnings rent. This is eternal death, and this the torment long foretold. A prophecy. The guardian prince of Albion burns in his nightly tent. Sullen fires across the Atlantic glow to America's shore, piercing the souls of warlike men who rise in silent night. Washington, Franklin, Payne, and Warren, Gates, Hancock, and Greene meet on the coast, glowing with blood from Albion's fiery prince. Washington spoke. Friends of America, look over the Atlantic Sea. A bended bow is lifted in heaven, and a heavy iron chain descends, link by link, from Albion's cliffs across the sea, to bind brothers and sons of America, till our faces pale and yellow, heads depressed, voices weak, eyes downcast, hands work bruised, feet bleeding on the sultry sands and the furrows of the whip, descend to generations that in future times forget. The strong voice sees it, for a terrible blast swept over the heaving sea. The eastern cloud rent. On his cliffs stood Albion's wrathful prince, a dragon form, clashing his scales. At midnight he arose, and flamed red meteors round the land of Albion beneath. His voice, his locks, his awful shoulders, and his glowing eyes. Appeared to the Americans upon the cloudy night. Solemn heave the Atlantic waves between the gloomy nations, swelling, belching from its deeps, red clouds and raging fires. Albion is sick, America faints. Enraged the zenith grew, as human blood, shooting its veins all round the orbed heaven. Red rose from the clouds, from the Atlantic in vast wheels of blood. And in the red clouds rose a wonder o'er the Atlantic Sea, intense, naked, a human fire, fierce glowing, as the wedge of iron heated in the furnace. His terrible limbs were fire, with myriads of cloudy terrors, banners dark, and towers surrounded. Heat, but not light, went through the murky atmosphere. The King of England, looking westward, trembles at the vision. Albion's angel stood beside the stone of night and saw the terror like a comet, or more like the planet red, that once enclosed the terrible wandering comets in its sphere. Then Mars, thou wast our center, and the planets 3 flew round thy crimson disk, so, ere the sun was rent from thy red sphere. The spectre glowed, his horrid length staining the temple long, with beams of blood, and thus a voice came forth and shook the temple. The morning comes, the night decays, the watchmen leave their stations. The grave is burst, the spices shed, the linen wrapped up. The bones of death, the covering clay, the sinews shrunk and dried. Reviving shake, inspiring move, breathing, awakening. Spring like redeemed captives, when their bonds and bars are burst. Let the slave grinding at the mill run out into the field. Let him look up to the heavens and laugh in the bright air. Let the enchained soul, shut up in darkness and in sighing, whose face has never seen a smile in 30 weary years, rise and look out. His chains are loose, his dungeon doors are open. And let his wife and children return from the oppressor's scourge. They look behind at every step and believe it is a dream, singing, "The sun has left his blackness and has found a fresher morning, and the fair moon rejoices in the clear and cloudless night. For empire is no more, and now the lion and the wolf shall cease." In thunders ends the voice. Then Albion's angel wrathful burnt beside the stone of night, and like the eternal lion's howl, in famine and war replied, "Art thou not Orc, who serpent formed stands at the gate of Enitharmon to devour her children? Blasphemous demon, Antichrist, hater of dignities, lover of wild rebellion, and transgressor of God's law, why dost thou come to angels' eyes in this terrific form?" The terror answered, "I am Orc, wreathed round the accursed tree. The times are ended, shadows pass, the morning 'gins to break. The fiery joy that Urizen perverted to 10 commandments, what night he led the starry host through the wild wilderness? That stony law I stamp to dust and scatter religion abroad, to the four winds as a torn book, and none shall gather the leaves. But they shall rot on desert sands and consume in bottomless deeps, to make the deserts blossom and the deeps shrink to their fountains, and to renew the fiery joy and burst the stony roof. That pale religious lechery, seeking virginity, may find it in a harlot and in coarse-clad honesty. The undefiled, though ravished in her cradle night and morn. For everything that lives is holy. Life delights in life. Because the soul of sweet delight can never be defiled. Fires enwrap the earthly globe, yet man is not consumed. Amidst the lustful fires he walks. His feet become like brass, his knees and thighs like silver, and his breast and head like gold. Sound, sound, my loud war trumpets, and alarm my 13 angels. Loud howls the eternal wolf, the eternal lion lashes his tail. America is darkened, and my punishing demons terrified. Crouch howling before their caverns deep, like skins dried in the wind. They cannot smite the wheat, nor quench the fatness of the earth. They cannot smite with sorrows, nor subdue the plow and spade. They cannot wall the city, nor moat round the castle of princes. They cannot bring the stubbed oak to overgrow the hills. For terrible men stand on the shores, and in their robes I see children take shelter from the lightnings. There stands Washington, and Payne, and Warren, with their foreheads reared towards the east. But clouds obscure my aged sight, a vision from afar. Sound, sound, my loud war trumpets, and alarm my 13 angels. Ah, vision from afar. Ah, rebel form that rent the ancient heavens. Eternal viper, self-renewed, rolling in clouds. I see thee in thick clouds and darkness on America's shore, writhing in pangs of abhorred birth. Red flames the crest, rebellious, and eyes of death, the harlot womb, oft opened in vain, heaves in enormous circles. Now the times are returned upon thee. Devourer of thy parent, now thy unutterable torment renews. Sound, sound, my loud war trumpets, and alarm my 13 angels. Ah, terrible birth, a young one bursting. Where is the weeping mouth, and where the mother's milk? Instead, those ever-hissing jaws and parched lips drop with fresh gore. Now roll thou in the clouds. Thy mother lays her length, outstretched upon the shore beneath. Sound, sound, my loud war trumpets, and alarm my 13 angels. Loud howls the eternal wolf. The eternal lion lashes his tail. Thus wept the angel voice, and as he wept, the terrible blasts of trumpets blew a loud alarm across the Atlantic deep. No trumpets answer, no reply of clarions or of fifes. Silent, the colonies remain and refuse the loud alarm. On those vast shady hills between America and Albion's shore, now barred out by the Atlantic Sea, called Atlantean Hills, because from their bright summits you may pass to the golden world, an ancient palace, archetype of mighty emperies, rears its immortal pinnacles, built in the forest of God, by Ariston, king of beauty, for his stolen bride. Here, on their magic seats, the 13 angels sat perturbed. For clouds from the Atlantic hover o'er the solemn roof. Fiery the angels rose, and as they rose, deep thunder rolled around their shores, indignant burning with the fires of Orc. And Boston's angel cried aloud as they flew through the dark night. He cried, "Why trembles honesty? And like a murderer, why seeks he refuge from the frowns of his immortal station? Must the generous tremble and leave his joy to the idle, to the pestilence that mock him? Who commanded this? What God? What angel? To keep the generous from experience, till the ungenerous are restrained performers of the energies of nature? Till pity is become a trade, and generosity a science, that men get rich by, and the sandy desert is given to the strong? What God is he, writes laws of peace, and clothes him in a tempest? What pitying angel lusts for tears, and fans himself with sighs? What crawling villain preaches abstinence and wraps himself in fat of lambs? No more I follow, no more obedience pay. So cried he, rending off his robe and throwing down his scepter, in sight of Albion's guardian and all the 13 angels, rent off their robes to the hungry wind, and threw their golden scepters down on the land of America. Indignant they descended. Headlong from out their heavenly heights, descending swift as fires o'er the land. Naked and flaming are their lineaments seen in the deep gloom. By Washington and Payne and Warren they stood, and the flame folded, roaring fierce within the pitchy night, before the demon red, who burnt towards America. In black smoke, thunders, and loud winds, rejoicing in its terror. Breaking in smoky wreaths from the wild deep, and gathering thick in flames as of a furnace on the land from north to south. What time the 13 governors that England sent convene in Bernard's house. The flames cover the land. They rouse, they cry. Shaking their mental chains, they rush in fury to the sea, to quench their anguish. At the feet of Washington, down fallen, they grovel on the sand and writhing lie, while all the British soldiers through the 13 states sent up a howl of anguish, threw their swords and muskets to the earth, and run from their encampments and dark castles, seeking where to hide from the grim flames and from the visions of Orc in sight of Albion's angel, who, enraged, his secret clouds opened from north to south, and burnt, outstretched on wings of wrath, covering the eastern sky, spreading his awful wings across the heavens. Beneath him rolled his numerous hosts, all Albion's angels camped, darkened the Atlantic mountains, and their trumpets shook the valleys. Armed with diseases of the earth to cast upon the abyss, their numbers 40 millions, mustering in the eastern sky. In the flames stood and viewed the armies drawn out in the sky. Washington, Franklin, Payne, and Warren, Allen, Gates, and Lee, and heard the voice of Albion's angel give the thunderous command. His plagues, obedient to his voice, flew forth out of their clouds, falling upon America as a storm to cut them off. As a blight cuts the tender corn when it begins to appear. Dark is the heaven above, and cold and hard the earth beneath. And, as a plague wind, filled with insects, cuts off man and beast. And, as a sea o'erwhelms a land in the day of an earthquake, fury, rage, madness, in a wind swept through America, and the red flames of Orc that folded, roaring, fierce, around the angry shores, and the fierce rushing of the inhabitants together. The citizens of New York close their books and lock their chests. The mariners of Boston drop their anchors and, unlaid, the scribe of Pennsylvania casts his pen upon the earth. The builder of Virginia throws his hammer down in fear. Then had America been lost, overwhelmed by the Atlantic, and earth had lost another portion of the infinite. But all rushed together in the night, in wrath and raging fire. The red fires raged, the plagues recoiled, then rolled they back with fury. On Albion's angels. Then the pestilence began in streaks of red, across the limbs of Albion's guardian. The spotted plague smote Bristol's, and the leprosy London's spirit, sickening all their bands. The millions sent up a howl of anguish, and threw off their hammered mail, and cast their swords and spears to earth, and stood, a naked multitude. Albion's guardian writhed in torment on the eastern sky. Pale, quivering, toward his brain, his glimmering eyes, teeth chattering, howling and shuddering, his legs quivering, convulsed each muscle and sinew. Sickening lay London's guardian, and the ancient mitred York, their heads on snowy hills, their ensigns sickening in the sky. The plagues creep on the burning winds, driven by flames of orc, and by the fierce Americans rushing together in the night. Driven o'er the guardians of Ireland and Scotland and Wales. They, spotted with plagues, forsook the frontiers, and their banners, seared with fires of hell, deformed their ancient heavens with shame and woe. Hid in his cave, the bard of Albion felt the enormous plagues, and a cowl of flesh grew o'er his head, and scales on his back and ribs. And rough, with black scales, all his angels fright their ancient heavens. The doors of marriage are open, and the priests in rustling scales rush into reptile coverts, hiding from the fires of orc, that play around the golden roofs in wreaths of fierce desire, leaving the females naked and glowing with the lusts of youth. For the female spirits of the dead, pining in bonds of religion, run from their fetters, reddening, and in long-drawn arches sitting. They feel the nerves of youth renew, and desires of ancient times, over their pale limbs, as a vine when the tender grape appears. Falling into the deep sublime, flagged with grey-browed snows, and thunderous visages, his jealous wings waved over the deep. Weeping in dismal, howling woe, he dark descended, howling, around the smitten bands, clothed in tears and trembling, shuddering, cold. His stored snows he poured forth, and his icy magazine he opened on the deep and on the Atlantic Sea, white, shivering. leprous his limbs, all over white, and hoary was his visage. Weeping in dismal howlings before the stern Americans, hiding the demon red with clouds and cold mists from the earth, till angels and weak men 12 years should govern o'er the strong, and then their end should come, when France received the demon's light. Stiff shudderings shook the heavenly thrones, France, Spain, and Italy, in terror viewed the bands of Albion and the ancient guardians, fainting upon the elements, smitten with their own plagues. They slow advance to shut the 5 gates of their law-built heaven. Filled with blasting fancies and with mildews of despair, with fierce disease and lust, unable to stem the fires of Orc. But the 5 gates were consumed, and their bolts and hinges melted, and the fierce flames burnt round the heavens, and round the abodes of men. Errors my own. Thank you for listening.